I offer, for your journalistic pleasures, my life story.
So, how long have you been dead?
The year was 1910. My business was desire.
Let me introduce you to Mr. Lestat de Lioncourt.
I know who you are, sir. We're destined to be very good friends.
I'm assuming you only met at night.
It's New Orleans. Days are for sleeping off the previous evening's damage. That's your thing, then? You like to watch?
I've been watching you for some time now. I can swap this life of shame. Swap it out for a dog gift.
Let the tale seduce you, just as I was seduced.
There was a boy.
He was my murderer, my mentor, my lover, and my maker.
A very strange enchanted boy.
It was as if I could finally receive the secrets of existence.
Your eyes, like a church window.
I was not yet ready to hunt, but desperate to feed.
It's best to let the food come to you.
You're not welcome in this home.
This is how it has to be.
I don't want to kill people.
You're a vampire.
I could not save myself, but I could save her.
She'll be what? A daughter.
We're a family.
She is poisoning you against me.
You two have each other. Who am I supposed to love?
This is not a life! You took my life!
We'll be together 10,000 nights, 100,000.
Ready to begin the adventure of our lives. My companions in immortality.
Welcome to the Screen Watching Channel. I'm Simon Foster. Our guest stars as Daniel Molloy in AMC Plus's adaptation of Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire, the latest in a long and memorable gallery of characters on screens big and small. It is, if nothing else, it's a personal thrill to welcome Eric Bogosian to Screen Watching. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing very well. The sun is shining. I'm happy.
That's a bonus. That's always good. I want to start in very broad terms and ask about vampires. Why have vampires remained so potent as figures in storytelling? How do we keep returning to Anne Rice's characters or Stephen King's characters or Bram Stoker's characters and still find relevance and adaptability?
Well, I can speak from my own personal feelings about vampires, that I've always been intrigued by vampires, going back to Dracula, Bela Lugosi, but also Frank Langella on Broadway playing Dracula.
Oh,
and
wow.
I think it's the power and the sexuality. There's a sort of an intensity, but beyond that, and I think why they're so enduring is, and speaking just from my own point in my life and Daniel Molloy's point in his life, immortality. What would it mean to never die? Because you think about those things as you get older. But then there's what you also asked about Anne Rice, and Anne Rice, of course, brings something new to the recipe, because she makes her vampires people with they're not just monsters, they're not just some scary dark guy, which I always dug the power of vampires, Dracula, but when you know them as people, especially on our show where there's so much passion and so much emotion, it's a whole other thing. And I think she started that, and of course now we've seen it in many different variations. There's the vampire, What We Do in the Shadows, or whatever that show. I shouldn't mention another show, but look, it's great. I can't not be enthusiastic about great stuff.
Tell me about the man that Daniel Molloy has become. And are you getting much leeway with the characters? The quote Ken Burns can choke on the footnote sounds very Bogosianian, I guess you could say. Are you getting a lot of input into the development, and how did you see this character when you came on board?
Well, the funny thing is the day before I got the offer to do this gig, which I didn't know anything about, I was thinking there's one thing left that I want to do before my career comes to an end, and that is play a vampire, which was strange that the next day I got the phone call, and it was not to play a vampire, but to play Daniel Molloy. I knew the book, I had read it when it came out, which puts me before almost all the kids on the show. None of those guys were even alive then. Daniel Molloy and I have many parallels. He is somebody who had a real heyday, and now he's in his 60s and he's not feeling it so much anymore. And he's kind of grumpy. And I have plenty of those days. And all of a sudden, this thing that was a spark way in the beginning of his career, and it didn't really ignite, it shows up again in his life. The vampire invites him to come back and interview him again, but as a much older guy and as a much better interviewer. He's done a lot since then. He's won Pulitzers. And he actually, as I do, looks at his very early work and thinks, wow, that was so sloppy and that was so poorly done. And
no, really?
Well, the early stuff. I mean,
Sure.
There are things I love that I did, but I'm talking about, in my 20s. And in many ways, I was like Daniel Molloy in his 20s, which was that he was ready to go into any bar and hang out with anybody and do any drug or whatever he needed to do to get the experience. And I felt that that was kind of my job when I was 24 years old in New York City, was to see everything, feel everything. So I have a lot of parallels with him. As far as my input, I have to be honest, Rolin Jones has done an incredible job on this show, interpreting Anne Rice, but also he kind of knows my voice. And I didn't know him before we started working together, but he wrote to my voice, and I don't even know my own voice, but I guess it's been established, certainly with talk. I don't know. When I was doing, and people don't even remember this, but when I was doing the Seagal movie years ago, I had already done talk radio, and I couldn't figure out the role. And there was this wonderful actor on set, and I was trying to puzzle it out. And he says, just do that, that Eric thing that you do. And suddenly became clear, like, this is kind of my thing. And I don't even know. Look, honestly, I look at the script, I study the script, and I say the lines the way I think they're supposed to be said. That's been the way it's always been for me since I was a kid.
Yeah.
I didn't really learn how to act. I just started at one point when I was 15 years old, and that's who I am.
I want to talk about that first meeting between Daniel and Louis, and whether it's in Rice's novels or in Neil Jordan's movie, and certainly in your show. It's one of my favorite sort of opening salvos of a story, like to introduce these two characters together and give them this dynamic of one being human and ambitious and one being supernatural and the alpha predator as well. You and the show's writers set yourselves a mighty task in revisiting that classic moment all these decades on. What do we learn is the same, and what is different about their relationship after 40 odd years?
Before I get into that side of it, I just want to say that a big reason why I did the show is because of Jacob Anderson. I'm a fan of Game of Thrones, and I was a fan of him on Game of Thrones. Yeah. I used to watch him and think, what does this guy do? This is really hard to do. He's very, very subtle on that show. And so when I heard that he was going to be the guy I would mainly be doing scenes with, I really looked forward to it. And it takes two to tango, and he was ready to dance, as he shows even much more so with Sam. The scenes they have together are like crazy. But
sure.
So here is this guy who was ready to bring all that emotion to the scenes, which created a lot of tension in the scenes, because he's kind of hypnotizing me all the time. And actually, when I'm in the scenes with him, it is hypnotic. I mean, Jacob is really kind of coming at me while I'm doing the scenes. And I would find myself pulled into his eyes. As far as, I think I just said something similar a second ago. I want to go back and I want to do it right this time. And to quote The Who, won't get fooled again. I'm going to find out what the real story is this time. And I have I have a toolbox that I didn't have when I was 25 or 24, whatever I was, the boy in the movie, in the original book. I know how to go get the story, and I don't believe everything that's told to me, and I try and piece it together, which is what happens over the 7 episodes, is trying to figure it out. And which is what a gift that Rolin gave me, that gift, because that actually isn't in the books. And this constant piecing together, and then, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but
Sure.
who all the characters are and what's really going on and how I figure it out. I don't even really completely figure it out until the last millisecond of the series, or the first season. So I guess that's what's changed. I'm a much slyer, craftier, and I also want to say he's a journalist. I'm not a journalist, and journalists of his level, they get the story no matter how much danger they're in. And that's another thing that he didn't have when he was a kid. He was just being careless. He was just impetuous. But over the years, like if you ever talk to any people who've been to Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever today in Ukraine, and they're getting the story, they put themselves in danger. And I'm not saying I'm that guy. I'm saying Daniel is that guy.
Sure.
He's ready to go get that story.
A brief sort of staring into your past, if we could. You mentioned talk radio, which I revisited last night after many years, and I still stand by my sort of assumption that it's probably that and JFK are Oliver Stone's 2 best films. And
thank you.
What's Barry Chaplain up to in today's America? What would he say about what's become of the media landscape?
Well, I don't know that Barry always understood the dynamics of what he was in the thick of. He's a character; he's not a real person. But
Sure.
Like a lot of people, and I look at some of these people, like Alex Jones, and Alex Jones, whatever his name is, and I think, did this guy say to himself, "I want to become a millionaire by being a horrible person"? Is that what he did, or did he just intuit that, as did Rush Limbaugh, as did many? That this is a scene where I can pretty much say or do anything, and it's going to make me rich and famous. I think that was very much operant in the talk radio dynamic, and it was something that I was interested in on a most basic level as a performer, of how far are you willing to go to get the audience to come to you. And sometimes the audience coming to you, you can get a huge audience being an awful person, and it becomes its own punishment in and of itself. Or let's look at it another way, losing your dignity. I don't just want a career, I want a life. I want dignity. I want to be here in my life, enjoying my life. So I know that there are options, like in terms of stand-up comedy, for instance. All comedians know that if you work blue or you swear a lot in your show, you're gonna get the audience with you in a little club. Then what happens? And then what happens when you make it all the way and you're filling Madison Square Garden saying the most horrible things in the world? You got to live with that. So that becomes part of what a performer has to do. And I was thinking about that in terms of Barry when I created him. And strangely, we have seen this come up again and again and again in our, I think a president was elected based on the manner of the mass media. But that's been going, when I wrote talk radio, there were movies that had come before that and had said the same things. No, I'm not going to remember the names of the movies, but Face in the Crowd, and
of course, yeah, and Network. There's elements of Network in there as well.
And Network, Face in the Crowd and Network. Yeah, they're very similar. They all have the same dynamic, that there's some big surprise speech at the end that blows everything up. So I can't say that I invented it, but it is part of our culture, and we keep talking about it, and it somehow has become even more a bigger issue now. I mean, it's intense. We really don't even, we feel like we're just flying blind with this strange, these media voices speaking to us all the time, telling us things that are lies or exaggerations.
You mentioned stand-up there, and live theatre, and the experience of live theatre, I imagine, is your first love. the adoration you have for words and actors exploring those words on stage is clear from your just wonderful website, 100 Monologues, which I watched Winona Ryder and Betty Gilpin's contributions this morning, and they're just wonderful. How's Broadway doing? Or I guess more specifically, how's off-Broadway doing? I mean, the big musicals will always pull a crowd on Broadway, but how are the smaller theatres in the side streets doing?
Everybody's limping along. No one, I mean, if we could get COVID to just chill out a little bit, people want to go to the theater. I think that there's this idea that has evolved in our culture that theater is like live movies, or live TV or movies live, partially because we've got movie and TV stars on stage. But that's not what theater is. Theater is something where you go with a group of people and you feel something collectively, and there's this moment that happens between the audience and the stage that you leave the theater, you're more alive, you're not more isolated. And I think in that way, theater is very radical, and theater is also always needed. And people talk about the things that need to be talked about. I mean, I think of a play like The Normal Heart, which addressed the AIDS crisis and changed things. And when Larry wrote that play, you know, he was speaking for a community and they were talking to each other. And that comes up all the time. It's coming up with the new plays that are coming up right now on Broadway, particularly with minority groups and so forth. So we're learning, we're talking to ourselves. And I think in that regard, it's always going to be alive. But I mean, the interesting thing about, you know, how is Broadway doing or how is off-Broadway doing? Broadway is a commercial venture, and off-Broadway is more a venture of a community. So they will never crush off-Broadway. It will always continue. People will keep making theater any way they possibly can. As far as what will happen in Broadway, look, they've made a ton of money and they're going to keep making a ton of money. And I'm not going to be too worried about whether Lion King is going to make its next $1 billion. I mean, I love those guys, but that's a different sort of world.
They'll do okay, yeah. I guess finally, I wanted to raise, in preparing for this interview, I guess I taught myself that you remain very deeply connected to your Armenian ancestry and culture, and I've got a very dear friend who's Armenian, and I'll certainly be buying the Operation Nemesis book that you published back in 2017. It sounds like a fascinating read. The country is at present in a very tense situation with Azerbaijan over border regions that isn't getting the Western media coverage it ought to. How do you regard the state of affairs in your homeland?
Well, let's be real clear. I'm very proud of my heritage, and it's something that's grown in me. And writing the book Operation Nemesis, which is about a group of assassins, it's not fiction, it's true story. Who took revenge for the genocide, was an amazing journey for me that lasted like 7 years. And I developed a very deep love of my own history, which has been very, very long. The Armenian people have been around before everybody else. Before there were Arabs in the Middle East, before there were Turks in the Middle East, there were Armenians. Our first Christian church was Armenian. Noah's Ark landed in Armenia. So yeah, this is a really, really horrible time right now. As from my political point of view, aside from being Armenian, I look at things a little differently than many Armenians do. I see these politics as politics, proxy politics, Russia versus the United States, using these small countries to smash into each other. And you know who loses? It's the little people. There are some really poor. The Caucasus Mountains is filled with, you know, small communities in who they need support. So we support them from our side. I try to support more culturally I send money and so forth to the organizations that try to create, or because the kids of Armenia are intensely hardworking and smart, and they want to make a life for themselves. But yeah, what's going on between Azerbaijan and Armenia, look, it's beyond me. I'm not a politician, and I don't claim to be a political pundit, but I do think that there are things that are part of that dynamic that aren't just Muslim versus Christian. They are oil politics and things like that, you know, it's deep and I don't understand. It's very sad. It's sad.
It is sad. But it's been wonderful, a joy and an honor to chat with you, Eric Bogosian. Congratulations on Interview with the Vampire on AMC Plus. And certainly thank you so much for joining us on Screen Watching. It's been a joy.
Thank you for a great interview. Thanks.